The stagecoach rattled to a halt in front of Willow Creek's only hotel, dust swirling in the late afternoon sun as Penelope Mitchell clutched her worn leather satchel with trembling hands. This small Wyoming town would be her final destination, or perhaps just another temporary stop in a life defined by constant flight. The year was 1878, and like many women who had answered advertisements seeking wives for lonely frontiersmen, Penelope had come west with little more than hope and desperation. Her pale blue dress, mended in 3 places but still respectable, hung loosely on her thin frame. The bruises on her wrists had faded to a dull yellow, but the ones on her soul remained vivid and raw. "Last stop, miss," the driver called, helping her down with a calloused hand. "Welcome to Willow Creek." Penelope nodded her thanks, surveying the single dusty street lined with wooden buildings. A general store, saloon, small church, and various shops made up the heart of the town. It wasn't much, but perhaps that was for the best. Perhaps here, hundreds of miles from Boston, she could finally disappear. "You must be the mail-order bride," a plump woman called, hurrying down the hotel steps. "I'm Martha Bailey, I run the hotel. Your husband-to-be sent word you'd be arriving today." Penelope forced a smile. "Yes, that's me. Mr. Collins is expecting me." "Indeed he is. Fine man, Mr. Collins. Owns the largest cattle ranch this side of the territory. You're quite fortunate." Fortunate wasn't a word Penelope would have chosen. Desperate, perhaps. Terrified, certainly. But when she'd seen the advertisement in the newspaper, "Respectable rancher seeks gentle, educated wife, fair paid," she'd seen it as her only escape. "He's arranged for you to stay here tonight," Martha continued. "Said he'd come collect you tomorrow, give you time to rest after your journey." "That's very considerate," Penelope murmured, though relief flooded through her at the reprieve. One more night of solitude before meeting the man she'd agreed to marry. Inside the modest hotel room, Penelope unpacked her few belongings, carefully removing a small daguerreotype of her parents, both long dead. Her fingers traced the edge of the frame, wondering what they would think of her now. Their daughter, once destined for a comfortable life in Boston society, now fleeing west under an assumed name, about to marry a stranger. She caught her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin. At 24, she was no longer the fresh-faced girl who had married Harold Blackwood 4 years ago. Her chestnut hair remained lustrous when brushed out, but her hazel eyes held shadows that hadn't been there before. The small scar at her temple was usually hidden by her hair, but she knew it was there, a permanent reminder. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams haunted by hands that grabbed and struck, by a voice that promised love while delivering pain. She woke with the first light, her nightgown damp with sweat. After dressing in her best dress, a simple gray cotton with white lace at the collar, Penelope descended to the hotel's small dining room. Several patrons turned to look at her, curiosity evident in their gazes. "You must be Mr. Collins' bride," a young waitress said, bringing coffee. "He's a good catch." Penelope nodded, having heard this refrain several times now. Everyone seemed eager to assure her of her good fortune, which only heightened her anxiety. Her previous good fortune had nearly killed her. "Do you know when he'll arrive?" she asked. "Oh, he won't be coming," the girl replied cheerfully. "Sent his foreman instead. That's him outside now." Penelope's heart sank. What kind of man couldn't be bothered to collect his own bride? Through the window, she could see a tall figure dismounting from a horse. Not her husband-to-be, but a mere employee sent to fetch her like a parcel. After quickly finishing her coffee, she gathered her satchel and stepped onto the hotel porch. The foreman stood with his back to her, speaking to the livery boy. He wore worn leather chaps over denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a broad-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I believe you're here for me." He turned, and Penelope found herself looking up into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen. Set in a sun-weathered face, they crinkled slightly at the corners as he removed his hat. His light brown hair was cut short, and a neat mustache framed his upper lip. "Miss Mitchell?" he asked, his voice deep but gentle. "I'm Henry Wade, foreman at the Rocking Sea Ranch." "Yes, I'm Penelope Mitchell," she confirmed, momentarily distracted by the unexpected warmth in his gaze. "Is Mr. Collins unwell?" Something flickered across Henry's face, a grimace quickly suppressed. "Not exactly, madam. I've got a wagon for your things if you're ready." The evasion was not lost on Penelope, but she nodded. "This is all I have," she said, indicating her single satchel, surprise registered in his expression. "That's all? Well, I reckon, Mrs. Collins, that is. You'll be able to order more from the catalogs once you're settled." The journey to the ranch took nearly 2 hours, the wagon bumping along a rutted trail that wound through golden plains dotted with sagebrush. Penelope sat stiffly beside Henry, maintaining a proper distance, though the jolting of the wagon occasionally sent her shoulder brushing against his. "I should tell you," Henry said after they'd traveled in silence for some time, "Mr. Collins is not quite as advertised." Penelope's hands tightened on her satchel. "What do you mean?" "He's 73 years old, madam, and he's been bedridden with rheumatism for the past 3 months. The revelation struck Penelope like a physical blow. 73, but the advertisement, he wrote that he was 45. "Yes, madam, I tried to tell him it wasn't right, but—" Henry shook his head. "George Collins has never been a man to let facts interfere with what he wants." Fear coiled in Penelope's stomach. "And what exactly does he want with a wife he can't even collect himself?" Henry's eyes met hers, his expression unreadable. "Mostly someone to read to him and manage the household staff, from what I gather. He's got no family, you see. His first wife passed 10 years ago." The relief that flooded through Penelope was immediate and overwhelming. An elderly, bedridden husband was far preferable to a younger, stronger man with violent tendencies. "I see," she said softly. "I can certainly manage that." Henry studied her for a moment. "You don't seem overly disappointed." "I came here for security, Mr. Wade, not romance." He nodded, turning his attention back to the trail. "Fair enough, and it's just Henry, madam. We don't stand on ceremony much out here." "Then you must call me Penelope." The rocking sea ranch appeared on the horizon, a sprawling compound centered around a large 2-story house built of sturdy timber. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands formed a rough semicircle behind it. Cattle grazed in the distance, small dark shapes against the vast landscape. "It's impressive," Penelope acknowledged as they approached. "George built it himself when he first came here 30 years ago, Henry said, a note of pride in his voice. "Started with nothing but has nearly 3,000 head of cattle now." The wagon pulled up to the house, and Henry helped Penelope down, his strong hands gentle at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, which she quickly dismissed. She had no business noticing such things, not when she was about to meet her future husband. A middle-aged woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on an apron. "You must be Miss Mitchell. I'm Mrs. Abernathy, the housekeeper. We've been expecting you." "Is Mr. Collins awake?" Henry asked. "Just had his midday medicine, so he's resting now," Mrs. Abernathy replied. "Best to let him sleep. Miss Mitchell can meet him at supper." "I'll show you to your room," Henry offered. "You'll have your own quarters until the wedding, of course." The interior of the ranch house was unexpectedly refined, with polished wooden floors, quality furniture, and even a few paintings adorning the walls. Penelope's room was spacious and airy, with a large bed, wardrobe, washstand, and a small writing desk positioned near the window that overlooked the distant mountains. "It's lovely," she said honestly. "Mrs. Collins, the first Mrs. Collins, had refined tastes," Henry explained. "George indulged her. Said a woman needed beautiful things around her to thrive in such a harsh land." Penelope wondered if the current Mrs. Collins-to-be would receive similar consideration. "How long have you worked for Mr. Collins?" 15 years, Henry replied. "Came when I was just 20, looking for work. He taught me everything I know about ranching. You must be very loyal to him." A shadow crossed Henry's face. "George Collins gave me a chance when others wouldn't, but that doesn't mean I agree with everything he does." His eyes met hers directly. "Including misleading a young woman about who she's coming to marry." The statement hung between them, honest and slightly dangerous. Penelope found herself warming to this straightforward man who seemed troubled by his employer's deception. "I appreciate your candor, Henry," she said quietly. "But I made my choice when I boarded that stagecoach." After Henry left, Penelope unpacked her meager belongings and washed away the dust of travel. Mrs. Abernathy brought her a light meal and explained the household routines, chattering about the ranch and its operations with obvious pride. Mr. Collins was quite the force of nature before his health failed, the housekeeper said, but thankfully we have Henry. That man runs this ranch like it was his own, don't know what we'd do without him. When evening came, Penelope dressed carefully in her blue dress, the only other one she owned besides the gray, and followed Mrs. Abernathy to Mr. Collins' bedroom. George Collins was propped up against several pillows, his thin frame nearly lost in the large four-poster bed. His face was deeply lined, with wispy white hair and rheumy eyes that brightened considerably when Penelope entered. "Well now," he said, his voice surprisingly strong, "you're even prettier than your letter suggested." Penelope forced a smile, trying not to show her shock at his appearance. "Mr. Collins, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Come closer, girl. These old eyes don't work as well as they used to." She approached the bed, allowing him to take her hand in his papery one. Up close, she could see that he must have been handsome in his youth, with strong features now sunken with age. "You'll do nicely," he declared after his inspection. "We'll be married on Sunday. Pastor's already been notified." Sunday was only 3 days away. "That's very soon," Penelope managed to say. "No point in waiting. I need a wife and you need a husband. Simple as that." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Unless you've changed your mind now that you've seen me." There was a challenge in his tone that Penelope recognized all too well, the sound of a man used to getting his way. But unlike Harold, George Collins posed no physical threat. "Not at all," she said smoothly. "Sunday will be fine." The old man smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "Good. Henry will show you around the ranch tomorrow. You should know what you're getting, as it'll all be yours someday." Later that evening, as Penelope sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson, Henry joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "Thank you," she said, accepting it gratefully. The cooling evening air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. "You met the boss," Henry stated, leaning against the porch railing. "What did you think?" Penelope considered her answer carefully. "He seems determined." Henry chuckled, the sound warm in the gathering dusk. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it. George Collins is the most stubborn man I've ever met. Yet you've stayed with him for 15 years. A man could do worse than work for someone who speaks his mind and pays fair wages." Henry studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. "But a woman marrying such a man, that's different." Penelope met his gaze steadily. "I've made agreements with difficult men before, Mr. Wade. I have no illusions about this arrangement." Something in her tone must have revealed more than she intended, for Henry's expression softened. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question, and Penelope didn't treat it as one. She simply looked out at the darkening land, vast and untamed. "We all have our reasons for coming west," Henry said quietly when she didn't respond. "New beginnings are what this country was built on." "Is that why you came?" "For a new beginning," he nodded. "Left Philadelphia with nothing but the clothes on my back and a warrant for my arrest." Penelope's eyes widened. "You're a criminal," he corrected with a slight smile. "Got in a fight defending my sister's honor. The other fellow was a judge's son. I broke his jaw, he broke my future in the East." "And Mr. Collins didn't mind hiring a fugitive," Henry laughed. George said any man willing to stand up for a woman was the kind of man he wanted working for him. Then he taught me ranching from the ground up. The revelation softened something in Penelope's heart. He sounds more complex than he first appears. "Most people are," Henry agreed, his eyes finding hers in the fading light. "Even mail-order brides with secrets in their eyes." The next morning, true to his word, Henry showed Penelope the ranch operations. They rode on horseback, Henry on his chestnut gelding and Penelope on a gentle mare named Daisy. Though it had been years since she'd ridden, Penelope found the skill returning quickly, much to Henry's evident approval. "You ride well," he commented as they surveyed a herd of cattle grazing in a verdant valley. "My father taught me," she replied, "before he lost his fortune." Henry raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details. Instead, he explained the seasonal rhythms of the ranch: the spring calving, summer grazing, fall roundup, and winter feeding. As he spoke, his passion for the land and the work was evident, his hands gesturing expressively, his blue eyes bright with enthusiasm. "You love it here," Penelope observed. "I do," he admitted. "Never thought I'd find my place in the world on a Wyoming cattle ranch, but here I am." "And what will you do when?" She hesitated, uncertain how to phrase it delicately. "When George dies and you become the ranch owner," Henry finished for her. "I suppose that depends on you." The statement hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Would she keep him on? Would she even stay once her elderly husband passed? These questions remained unasked as they rode back to the ranch house, the sun high overhead. That afternoon, while Mr. Collins napped, Penelope explored the house more thoroughly. In the study, she discovered bookshelves filled with volumes on cattle breeding, Western exploration, and to her surprise, several shelves of classic literature. "His first wife loved to read," Henry said from the doorway, startling her. "Sorry, didn't mean to sneak up on you." Penelope's hand flew to her chest, her heart racing. "It's all right, I just didn't hear you." But Henry was frowning, noticing how she'd pressed herself against the bookshelf, her eyes wide with momentary fear. "No, it's not all right." "I should have announced myself." His perception unsettled her. "The books are wonderful," she said, changing the subject. "I didn't expect to find Dickens and Austen on a cattle ranch." Eliza Collins was an educated woman, taught school back east before marrying George. Henry stepped into the room but maintained a respectful distance. "She used to read aloud in the evenings. Sometimes the ranch hands would come up to the house just to listen." The image was charming rough cowboys gathered to hear literature by lamplight. "Perhaps I could continue the tradition," Penelope suggested. "I think George would like that." Henry hesitated, then added, "I wanted to tell you, there's no need to be afraid here." Penelope stiffened. "I'm not afraid." "With respect, madam, you flinch at sudden movements, you watch doorways. You keep your back to walls," his voice gentled. "I've seen that look before in horses that have been mistreated." Humiliation burned through her. "I am not a horse, Mr. Wade." "No, you're not," he agreed quietly. "You're a woman who's known pain. I won't pry into your past, but I want you to know that whatever you're running from, it won't find you here." Tears threatened, and Penelope turned away, focusing on the book spines to regain her composure. "Thank you for your concern, but I'm perfectly fine." Henry didn't press the issue, but as he left, he paused in the doorway. "Just so you know, Miss Mitchell, no one on this ranch would ever raise a hand to a woman. George Collins would fire any man who did, and I'd personally ensure they never found work in this territory again." The simple declaration, delivered without drama but with absolute conviction, pierced Penelope's carefully constructed defenses. For the first time since fleeing Boston, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that she might truly be safe. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. The ceremony was brief, conducted in Mr. Collins' bedroom with only Henry, Mrs. Abernathy, and Pastor Davis in attendance. Penelope wore her gray dress with fresh wildflowers in her hair, while George Collins managed to sit upright in bed, wearing a clean nightshirt and old formal jacket. "I, George, take you, Penelope, to be my lawfully wedded wife," the old man recited, his voice weaker than it had been days before. When it was her turn, Penelope spoke her vows clearly, aware of Henry's intense gaze from across the room. His face was unreadable, but something in his posture suggested tension. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Davis concluded. "Mr. Collins, you may kiss your bride." George Collins reached up with a trembling hand to pat Penelope's cheek. "There now, Mrs. Collins, it's done." That night, after a small celebration dinner during which her new husband dozed off twice, Penelope retired to her own room. Her status had changed, but her accommodations remained separate from her elderly husband's, a relief she hadn't dared hope for. As the summer progressed, Penelope settled into life at the rocking sea. She read to George daily, managed the household, and even began learning the business side of the ranch operations. To her surprise, her husband encouraged this education. "No point in you being ignorant of what you'll inherit," he said bluntly one afternoon. Besides, you've got a good head for figures." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd offered since their wedding. Henry continued to run the day-to-day ranch operations, consulting with George and, increasingly, with Penelope. Their interactions remained professional, but grew more comfortable as the weeks passed. Sometimes, she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something beyond respect or friendliness, something that made her heart beat faster despite her determination to ignore it. One evening in late August, a violent thunderstorm struck the ranch. Lightning split the sky and rain lashed against the windows with frightening force. Penelope was reading to George when a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the house. "Damn weather," the old man muttered. "Hope the herd doesn't scatter." "Should I send for Henry?" Penelope asked, concerned. George waved a dismissive hand. "He'll already be out there. Man's got instincts like a wolf, probably had the boys moving the herd to lower ground before the first drop fell." The storm raged through the night. Unable to sleep, Penelope paced her room, worrying about the cattle and, though she tried not to admit it, about Henry. When dawn finally broke, she dressed quickly and went downstairs to find several ranch hands in the kitchen, soaked to the skin and gratefully accepting hot coffee from Mrs. "Abernathy, where's Henry?" Penelope asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Still out with the second group," one of the men replied. "Lightning spooked about 50 head into the North Ravine. He went after them with Tom and Lewis. In this weather, that ravine floods during heavy rain." The ranch hands exchanged glances. "Yes, madam," another replied. "That's why he went. Said we couldn't lose that many cattle and couldn't risk them drowning either." Worry gnawed at Penelope throughout the morning. By noon, when there was still no sign of Henry and the others, she found herself unable to concentrate on anything. The rain had finally stopped, but the skies remained threatening. "They'll be fine," Mrs. Abernathy reassured her. "Henry Wade's survived worse than a summer storm." But when mid-afternoon came with no word, Penelope made a decision. "I'm going to look for them," she announced, heading for the stable. "Mrs. Collins, you can't," the housekeeper protested. "It's not proper and it could be dangerous." "I'm going," Penelope repeated firmly. "Please tell my husband where I've gone if he asks." She saddled Daisy herself, remembering the skills her father had taught her long ago, and set out toward the North Ravine. The trail was muddy and treacherous, but the mare was sure-footed. As she rode, Penelope tried to understand her own actions. Why was she risking herself for the ranch foreman? What was this feeling that drove her to ensure his safety? The answer she kept pushing away finally broke through her defenses. In the weeks since her arrival, Henry Wade had become important to her. More than important. His quiet strength, his integrity, his gentle way of speaking all had carved a place in her heart she'd thought permanently closed after Harold's abuse. The North Ravine came into view, a jagged cut in the landscape now filled with rushing water. Scanning the area anxiously, Penelope finally spotted movement on the far side. 3 riders herding a small group of cattle up the slope away from the water. Relief flooded through her. They were alive. She urged Daisy forward, intending to meet them at the crossing point a quarter-mile downstream. As she approached, one of the riders detached from the group and galloped toward her. Even at a distance, she recognized Henry's broad shoulders and the way he sat his horse. "Penelope," he called as he drew closer, "what in God's name are you doing out here?" "Looking for you," she answered honestly as he reined in beside her. "You didn't come back." His face, streaked with mud and exhaustion, registered surprise, then something warmer. "You were worried." "The whole ranch was worried," she corrected, suddenly self-conscious. Henry's eyes, so blue against his weather-beaten face, searched hers. "And you came yourself instead of sending one of the hands because I needed to know you were safe," she admitted softly. A smile broke across his features, transforming his exhaustion into something almost boyish. "Well, Mrs. Collins, I'm touched by your concern." The use of her married name was like a bucket of cold water. Penelope straightened in her saddle. "Mr. Collins was concerned about losing so many cattle." Henry's smile faded. "Of course, the cattle." He gestured to where Tom and Lewis were still moving the recovered herd. "We saved most of them, only lost 3 to the flood." They rode back to the ranch in silence, the unspoken tension between them more powerful than any words. Penelope was acutely aware of having crossed a line not in deed, but in the feelings she could no longer deny. That night, as she sat with George for their usual evening reading, her husband studied her with shrewd eyes. "You went looking for my foreman today," he stated. Penelope's hands tightened on the book. "I was concerned about the cattle." The old man shifted in his bed. "Henry Wade is the finest man I've ever known, best judge of cattle, best hand with horses, most honest fellow you'll ever meet." Uncertain where this was leading, Penelope remained silent. "He's also been half in love with you since he brought you here," George continued matter-of-factly. "Tries to hide it, but I've known that boy too long." Shame and alarm coursed through her. "Mr. Collins, I assure you—" "Oh, stop it," he interrupted irritably. "I'm old, not blind, and I didn't marry you expecting love, girl. I married you to have someone manage this place when I'm gone, which won't be long now." The blunt assessment of his mortality startled her. "You shouldn't talk that way." "Why not? It's the truth." George coughed, a rattling sound that worried Penelope. "I've lived a full life, built something from nothing. My only regret was not having someone to leave it to." "Which is why you sent for a wife," Penelope said softly. "Partly," he agreed, "but also because this ranch needs someone with sense to run it, someone who'll work with Henry, not against him." His rheumy eyes fixed on her. "I think you're that person, Penelope Collins." She didn't know how to respond to this unexpected vote of confidence. "As for Henry," George continued, "that man deserves happiness after all he's done for me. I'd like to know the rocking sea will be in good hands, both of yours, when I'm gone." Penelope's heart hammered in her chest. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting nothing," the old man said. "Just making an observation. Now, are you going to read, or are we going to sit here all night talking in circles?" 2 weeks later, George Collins died peacefully in his sleep. The ranch hands dug his grave on a small hill overlooking the property, and Pastor Davis conducted a simple service attended by nearly everyone in the county. George had been respected, if not always liked, and his funeral reflected that complicated legacy. Penelope stood at the graveside in her black dress, dry-eyed but genuinely saddened by the passing of the man who, in his gruff way, had offered her protection when she needed it most. Henry stood a respectful distance away, leading the contingent of ranch hands who had worked for George for years. After the service, as people dispersed back to the ranch house for the traditional meal, Penelope remained by the fresh grave. Henry approached slowly, giving her time to notice his presence. "He was a good man," Henry said simply, "in his own way." "Yes," Penelope agreed. "More perceptive than I gave him credit for." They stood in silence for a moment, the Wyoming wind rustling the prairie grass around them. "What will you do now?" Henry finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. Penelope turned to face him fully. "George left everything to me, as you know, including very specific instructions." "Instructions?" Henry's brow furrowed. "He left a letter, said I should open it after he was buried." She reached into her pocket and withdrew an envelope, its seal already broken. "Would you like to know what it says?" Henry nodded, his expression guarded. "Penelope," she read aloud, "if you're reading this, I've finally kicked the bucket. The ranch is yours to do with as you please. Sell it, keep it, that's your business now, but I have one last request. Don't waste time with mourning. Life's too short for that, especially when you've got a second chance at happiness standing right in front of you." She paused, glancing up to see Henry's reaction. His face had gone very still. "Henry Wade has loved that ranch almost as much as I have," she continued reading. "And unless I'm completely senile, he's halfway to loving you too. Don't let my memory stand in the way of whatever might grow between you. That's my final order as your husband." She refolded the letter carefully. "It's signed George." Henry's voice, when he finally spoke, was rough with emotion. "That sounds like him, direct to the end." "Yes," Penelope agreed softly, "and perceptive." "Penelope," Henry began, then stopped, searching for words. "I would never presume, when I came west," she interrupted. "I was running from a husband who had made marriage a prison and love a weapon. I thought I'd never trust a man again, never feel safe again." Her voice trembled slightly. "But then I met a foreman who looked at me like I mattered, who gave me space when I needed it, and who promised through his actions that I'd never be hurt again." Henry took a step closer, hope dawning in his eyes. I meant that promise even if I never said the words. I know. Penelope found her hand reaching for his almost without conscious thought. I'm not ready for another marriage, Henry, not yet, but I am ready to stop running. I want to stay here, run this ranch, and see what might develop between us in time. His hand closed around hers, warm and calloused. I've got all the time in the world, Penelope Collins. As autumn painted the Wyoming landscape in golds and russets, Penelope embraced her role as owner of the rocking sea. The ranch hands accepted her authority with surprising ease, especially when she made it clear that Henry would continue as foreman with expanded responsibilities. Their relationship evolved slowly, deliberately. Henry courted her with the patience of a man who understood the value of building trust. He brought her wildflowers from the high meadows, taught her to shoot a rifle, just in case, and spent evenings on the porch discussing books she'd discovered in George's library. One crisp October day, as they rode together checking the herd before the winter drive, Henry reined his horse to a stop on a ridge overlooking the valley. Cattle dotted the landscape below, fat and healthy before the long winter. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, his breath visible in the cooling air. It is, Penelope agreed, taking in the vastness of the land that had become her home. Penelope, Henry said, turning in his saddle to face her. I've been wanting to ask you something, her heart quickened. Yes. I know it's only been 3 months since George passed, and I know you said you needed time. I respect that, but I need you to know. He took a deep breath. I love you, have almost since the day I met you, and whenever you're ready, be it next month or next year, I want to make a life with you. A real marriage built on respect and kindness. Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not fear. Henry Wade, she said softly, I think I've been ready for weeks now, just too cautious to admit it. His face lit with a smile that warmed her more than any fire could. Is that a yes? It's a yes, she confirmed, but I have one condition. Name it. Promise me again out loud this time that I'll never be hurt again. Henry reached across the space between their horses to take her gloved hand in his. Penelope Mitchell Collins, I promise you'll never know fear or pain from my hands, only respect, support, and love, for as long as we both shall live. They were married on Christmas Day, with snow blanketing the ranch and evergreen boughs decorating the house. The same pastor who had married her to George performed the ceremony, but this time in the ranch house parlor, with ranch hands and neighbors filling every available space. This time, when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was real tender and promising at once. That night, as they lay together in what was now their bedroom, Penelope traced the lines of Henry's face in the firelight. Do you think George planned this all along? She asked, bringing me here knowing he wouldn't live long. Henry considered the question seriously. George Collins was a schemer, but I don't think even he could have predicted this. He pressed a kiss to her palm. I think he just wanted his ranch in good hands and found himself caring about your happiness more than he expected to. Our happiness, Penelope corrected, nestling against her husband's chest. He gave us both a gift in his way. That he did, Henry agreed, his arms tightening around her. And I intend to honor it every day by keeping my promise to you. Which promise was that? She teased. That you'll never be hurt again, he whispered against her hair. That you'll always be safe, always be valued, always be loved. As the winter wind sang around the eaves of the ranch house, Penelope closed her eyes, marveling at how far she had come from a desperate, frightened woman fleeing on a stagecoach to the mistress of a prosperous ranch, wrapped in the arms of a man who had taught her to trust again. She had arrived with a scarred past, but Henry Wade had promised she'd never be hurt again. And for the first time in years, Penelope believed in promises.